Hi, and welcome back to my garden. A lot of people will trot out that somewhat hackneyed phrase, time is money. Of course, what they mean is that your time is precious, it's important. But it's important because wasting it will cost someone money. So, really, what's important is the money. Now, I've become somewhat more sensitive to word order, I guess, living in a foreign country, speaking a different language. You start realizing how using different words or putting them in a different order can change everything, sometimes with disastrous results. So, how about on this occasion? What if we flipped it about? Money is time. What would that mean? I don't think it's frequently used. But to me, it would suggest something quite different. That money is useful, instrumental, because it can buy you time. And to a degree, I guess that's what I've been talking about recently, how your time is precious, and so you should spend it doing things that you love doing. And money is a very handy way of not buying more time, because time is a finite resource. You have the 24 hours in the day, and that's it. And the number of years that you have been allotted, if you follow that sort of religious line of thinking, or that fate grants you. So, time is incredibly precious, and money allows you, as a means of exchange, to avoid doing certain things because you can simply pay someone else to do them. And in that sense, money becomes time, extra time for you. Now, last week, I was trying to remember, and I mangled somewhat, that classic Peter Drucker, the management guru's classic phrase, and I couldn't remember. And no one, needless to say, popped it into the comments. So I looked it up, and it goes something along the lines of what gets measured gets managed. I mean, that in itself might be a little questionable. And it's been twisted around, and people now, sometimes we will hear it said, what gets measured matters. So we measure it, and it then becomes important in a corporate context. Perhaps interestingly, in this age of consultancies and whatnot, what becomes important is precisely the things that can be measured. The intangibles sort of get shuffled off to one side, simply because the hired specialists, the human resource people, it can't be measured, it can't be quantified, so it's conveniently forgotten. And I've thought once again, in one of those moments of subtly shifting the words around, perhaps what we should say is not what gets measured, but simply measure what matters. Now that's a much more interesting thing to say. And manage what matters. And if we kind of put all that together, and we see this sort of equivalence or this mapping of time and money, then I guess we need to measure our own usage of time and our own usage of money. Kind of takes me back to the beginning of my last mini-series, this idea that we need to ask ourselves, how much is enough? Well, how much is enough is a measurement question. And in both these regards, I speak with, dare I say it, a little bit of experience. I told you before about how this move to the northeast of Brazil was facilitated by a kind of rethinking my own relationship to my salary. And that involved an element of measurement. I've told the story of how I started looking at one of my harmless pastimes, going on a Sunday morning to Fnac, and I'd buy books and CDs. Well, there's nothing wrong in that. But when I started measuring it, it was hundreds and hundreds that I was spending every week. You know, in those times, I suppose exchange rate wasn't quite as pitiful as it is now, but it was probably $400-500 a month. And of course, it's not wasting money when you're buying books. But all the same, it was money that was leaving my bank account. And once I got that under control, I suddenly discovered that the idea of buying my own apartment wasn't so fanciful. I actually could afford it. And when I came here to the northeast, I started from day one. It took a while to cement the habit, but I started recording the time I spend in the studio, because it very quickly struck me that I'd come here. One of the reasons was to make art, and I was doing very little of that. I was doing all sorts of other things, lying in my hammock and reading Catch-22. Again, in and of itself, not a bad way to spend an afternoon or two. But it wasn't making art. And I started recording that, and I discussed this before in a little black book. And over the 8 years, I have seen how I have more than doubled the amount of time I spend doing art. And on any given month, I suppose I miss maybe at most a couple of days. Sometimes I don't do a lot, but I do something. So this idea of kind of measuring and mapping out the money you receive, where it goes, the time you have available, and how you're choosing to spend it, this is I have to say, very important. I think for me, certainly, and a bit of a game changer. Now, some folk might say, but, you know, yeah, it might have been important for you because you are leading a life of wanton hedonism and extravagance, and you are a world champion procrastinator. I am none of those things, you might argue. I work hard, you know, and I am sensible and sober in my habits. But a question to ask is, are you? How do you know? People have researched this, and it seems that, for example, many people spending 8 hours a day at the office are not spending 8 hours a day productively engaged. And perhaps if you got more of a grip on how you spent your day at work, and I say perhaps because it may well be totally beyond your control. And some draconian, vicious, evil manager may be tapping their watch at frequently throughout the day and driving you back to your desk, to your little cubicle hell, and you may be working 8, 9, 10 hours a day and really doing the work. But the research doesn't suggest that that's the truth. So perhaps there is a way of gaining time within your work context. But let's just assume that you are a responsible person, and probably if you're watching my videos, of course you are. Let us just assume for a moment that your day at work or the time for your commute is really out of your hands. That still leaves a lot of other time, and it still leaves the thorny question of how you're spending your money. And I think if you focus, and by this I don't mean it needs to be some sort of OCD kind of all-consuming activity driven by paranoia and obsession. No. But if you just get a big picture view of that, you may well find that a lot of possibilities are open to you, or at least a lot more is open to you than you first imagined. And I've been thinking about this recently, having done this little series about these questions of money, and thinking about this point of, well, what are the activities that I want to do? How much time am I spending doing them? I have my tracking activity for my sculpture, and I started tracking the time I spend writing. I track a little bit the time I spend doing chess-related activities. I sort of make distinctions. So watching a YouTube video live sort of broadcast of an online event, I don't count that because it's entertainment. I mean, it's nice entertainment, but it's entertainment all the same. But watching a video where someone teaches me something, I count that. So I'm doing that, and again, it's worth emphasizing, it's not something that is done in a ludicrously intense sort of way. I don't think I spend 10 minutes a day on the actual tracking side of it, and I get a lot of very valuable information. But what I decided last week to do was to kind of put that in a bigger picture goal, like I did when I started my sculpture project 8 years ago here. Then the idea was I would conveniently hang that time on the peg of the 10,000 hours and see how long it took me to do 10,000 hours of workshop time. And now, in terms of using my day in a way that is directed towards the things that I love doing, my target is to eventually spend 12 hours a day in those sorts of activities. And I hasten to add, that doesn't mean 12 hours a day of deep, kind of intense work. I'm not sure that's even possible. But 12 hours a day where my time is loosely spent around the activities that I really enjoy doing, and not going down some internet rabbit hole or watching some mindless comedy series that I'm not really enjoying. 12 hours a day doing the activities that I love doing, which sort of translates loosely to just over 350 hours a month. And at the moment, I guess I'm doing somewhere between 150 and 175. So I've given myself 5 years to double it, which very loosely translates to the sort of compounding theory of 1% better each month. And when you put it in those terms, I need to do 2 hours more each month and gain some momentum. It doesn't seem impossibly undoable. And based on the progress that I've seen with my sculpture, I think it might just change my life in an unimaginably rich and fantastic sort of way. So that's what I'm going to do. And sincerely, I'd love it if you did it too. And, you know, if you decide to take on some sort of challenge, let me know. Otherwise, until next week, I trust you're well, your lives are filled with joy, and until next week, from the beautiful, sometimes sunlit garden that I call home to my videos, ciao.